Hi, in this video on my robotic hand I want to focus on two things. The first or one focus is on the gear in the elbow itself, because last time it was clearly noticed that while the new motor here under functioned okay, there remains a big issue here, because one of the axes that is supposed to connect to the arm in the elbow isn't actually connected, which causes a problem that when the gear is successfully running, the arm isn't being moved. So I have to solve that. And the second problem is the focus on this motor, because it is no power motor like this one, and also the ratio of 20:1 is not the same as with this motor. So although this gear is the same as this gear, it won't run the same way. But the first focus is now on the connection of the axis to the arm. So let's see how we can solve that, if we can solve it. And to get a better idea of how to solve it, I rebuilt part of the gear, and it turns out to be quite possible if I make a little bit of a shift here and replace the solid block with a block with a hole in it, where one of the axes can go through, and that way it should be able to fix it to the arm. So now the big challenge is to replace this one and this one with the pierced ones with a hole in it, and most likely turn the whole thing around so that I can keep using all three gears. Another challenge is that this is only one side and it is quite a bit bent, so I'm curious how that is going to hold. Anyway, the first thing to do now is replace part of this. With the reconstructed elbow, now the one of the axes is running through the block, connecting all three gears. So that part should be working. However, looking at the rest of the gearing, I'm not quite sure if this is rigid enough, but only a test will show that. And when I turn it, for now it stands, and when I look down, I have added a block here through which the axis is running. So right now this gear is really put together against this gearing block from the motor. So with this change, or with these changes I should say, it's time to do another test if everything works as intended, and as said, I hope this part is rigid enough. So I guess I should do this using the diagnostics interface. So let's start that one. And curiously enough, the interface is not being detected. So the question is, what is wrong here? So there's some connection diagnostics to do. So after a reboot of the computer, the connection is present, and I'm quite curious how things work out. So let's see what happens. And so far, the only thing that actually did happen was the start of the compressor. But when I want to engage the motors of the elbow and those of the extra motor, absolutely nothing happens. So that may indicate that some points are not as good as thought. And the question is, of course, where the problem is. Even when I put a high speed, like position 6 or 7, that won't work, I'm afraid. So let's do it again. I hear the motors, but really nothing happens. So the question is the momentum too large, which is this momentum, or is this not good enough? If I move it by hand, for now this is quite okay, but the motors seem to encounter too much resistance to run even at their maximum speed. So I have to find out what that is. And yet again, small mistakes happen. Instead of a second motor, I have to use the slave, because these motors are connected to the slave. And then they do work, kind of. But then again, considerable force that is one. Will they work the other way around? I kind of doubt it. It's being lifted. Let's try again. And the fact that the arm is lifted is more to the fact that that the momentum is lifted than that these gears are lifted or are working. Okay, so let's try again. And that's not working because of these gears below. And yes, it's completely out of shape. I have to redo it. So these are quite some forces that are being used. And the biggest force is here. The fact that it is being lifted is coming from this this part and not from here, so that is quite curious. Let's try again, see what happens. And this one can't go any further. I have a blockage here, so let's release it. And see what happens again. Yeah, and again here things are lifted, so it is not rigid enough. These gears, at least this motor, is running freely from this gear, and the enormous force needed to lift the arm is solely coming from here. So despite the fact that it kind of works, everything comes from here, surprisingly. So I have to rethink the setup of the elbow. It has to be more rigid, because I'm convinced that this is more or less the good way, but right now it's really coming from here. So with these changes indicating an access through here, which hasn't proven yet because of the slipping gear here, but this one is certainly an improvement. I now can lift the arm successfully, and with that I think I have reached a nice point in this in development of this arm. While enough to do, fixing the gear and a reset up here, because this is going to this is being blocked, and that's not the intention. It should perhaps go further down, but we'll see if that can work out. So for now, thank you for watching. and to be continued.